Get ready. Oh, wow.
Shh. Let's see.
Hello? Hello? Hi. Okay. Yeah. When?
Oh my God.
Oh, yes.
I'm in a meeting.
One moment. One moment. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Can you guys just, anyone type anything in the chat if you guys can hear me? Not sure if the audio is on. Anyone? All right, then. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Sorry about that. So welcome to our webinar on applying to youth councils. Thank you guys so much for taking your time to be here. I will just introduce myself. Just getting used to Google Hangouts. I can switch to my camera. Hi, so yeah, my name is Janelle Hines. I am the founder of Helping Hands. We're a youth-led organization that's trying to encourage other youth to get engaged in their communities. And we realized one of the best ways to get engaged is to actually be on youth councils, and both the Minister Student Council and the Premier's Council are two enormous opportunities for you to have your voice heard. And we thought, what's a better way to make sure that we're helping people get engaged other than helping them actually apply to these councils. So just a little bit again about what Helping Hands is. So we're on a mission to increase youth civic engagement. We do this through technology. So we do volunteer matching. So we have an app that helps you connect you to your volunteer opportunities in the community. And this was centered around helping students figure out where they can do their volunteering to finish their 40 hours in order to graduate. The app also can track it, so we can get rid of all those pieces of paper that you have to fill out, and also some feedback that you can actually tell these placements when you go. You know, did they do a good job? What can they do better to make sure they engage you as youth? And also to get feedback yourself, kind of similar to adults have LinkedIn and they get these recommendations that really help them, but there isn't really anything like that for youth. So next time you have that first interview, whether it's for McDonald's or a different store or even an office job, you can just say that here is places I volunteered and this is the feedback I got from this. We also do stuff through in person. We host workshops. We also are planning to do some volunteer fairs over the next 2 years, and also a mentorship program. So we developed a workshop that helps connect you to 21st century skills, which is basically just saying soft skills, where we teach you about what is the importance of volunteering, other ways to be civically engaged, such as applying for youth councils, and actually trying to figure out how to provide support if you want to start your own initiative. So in a lot of the emails that you guys may have seen, I've been using these acronyms, MSAC and PCYO. So what are they? So the Ministry Student Advisory Council, it's a group of approximately 60 students that they take from grade 7 to grade 12, who are part of the publicly funded education system from regions across the province. And these students, their job is to share ideas with the Minister of Education regarding the education system. And this started a couple of years ago, and it was really just meant to be a place where students have their voice heard. And we'll show some examples later on of the impact previous cohorts have actually made. So the eligibility criteria and criteria for this is that you just have to be grades 7 to 12 in a publicly funded institution. So if you're in a private school, and you're over 16, look at the next council that I'm about to talk about. And the deadline for this one is January the 10th. The other one is the Premier's Council on Youth Opportunities. So it's an advisory board to the government, and they give advice to the Premier of Ontario, the Minister of Children and Youth Councils, as well as other ministers that where they have maybe portfolios that affect youth. For example, community services has a lot of other stuff that affect youth, or the justice. There's youth justice section to that. For this one, you just have to be over 16. There isn't any clear upper age limit for this one, as long as you're categorized as youth. A lot of the people on this council are people who are either in university or have graduated and are young professionals. A lot of them are doing stuff that are related to youth work. So depending on what your eligibility is, if you're over 16, I would definitely suggest looking at both. As if you're still in high school. So for this webinar, we're just going to go through, the first one we're going to go through is the Minister's Council, and then we're going to go through the Premier's Council. If you guys have any questions in the meantime, please put it in the live chat, and as we kind of go through, I'll try to switch back the windows to try to answer your questions. So I think one of the biggest and most important facts that you want to pay attention to when it comes to the Minister's Council is they really, really do care about diversity. In creating this webinar, I did a lot of work to outreach to people that have already been on the council. Unfortunately, I wasn't on this myself as the year kind of got started back then. Unfortunately, myself wasn't that interested in this type of work, where now I am. But I think it has a huge value in being able to say that you're in high school and you already know how to talk to government. So as mentioned, a lot of these people, when I reached out, I didn't really ask people specific questions. Sometimes I was just like, generally tell me what you think about the Minister's Council. And a lot of people kind of focus in on the diversity of it. So it's not just even diversity within race, it's race, gender, people that have dropped out of school that are going to alternative schools, from people who are involved in sports to people who are involved in art. They really try their best to make sure that they're getting a wide range of students, and that they also represent across Ontario. So not just people from Toronto, but people from rural areas of Ontario as well. And one of the nice things that we got to is we got in touch with one of the original educators who was involved in creating this council, and she also even said that reminded me that it might have changed because she retired last year, but before that they actually even have some placements for francophone students, as well as students who are involved in ACO, which is for different school boards that have student senates and other student trustees. They have some placements specifically for those students. So what's involved in this council? Really, it's not that much. The council just meets with the Ministry of Education twice a year. So there's a full day event in Toronto in the spring, as well as a 5-day treat in Aurelia. So for this, any travel that you do, it's covered. So you do not have to worry about your financial situation in order to take part in this. They will pay for all your accommodation, your food, and your transportation. As well, if you're under 18, they'll also cover it if you need a parent or guardian. read a quote to you guys. So the orientation is simply meeting other MSAC meetings and introducing to the ideas and the ideas of others. There's a bit of silence until you reach the summer. During the week, we work with and consult with different branches of the ministry to give our opinions. Near the end, we begin forming committees that meet together to discuss a general area, such as rural schools, French education, and student success. These committees are mandated to write a report completed with research to be given to the Minister of Education, who will then represent the student voice to various branches. On top of this, you can be invited to participate in extra consultations with actual branches. And the student that gave this quote was lucky to be invited as a student rep in regards to student well-being. So this is the Ontario Education Leadership Center where happened in Aurelia, and it looks like a lot of fun. So as I mentioned, they kind of have these subcommittees. So a big part of it is not just saying, oh, here, let's talk about all issues, trying to find, of those 60 students that you have similar issues to, like rural education or French education, and kind of get into to sit down together and talk about those issues. So again, the reports aren't that difficult. They're less than 2 pages. If you guys want, I do have access to one of the previous reports. I can't share it widely, so if you guys do want access to it, please do message us, and I'll have the email at the end of the report of the presentation. But basically, what they do is all these different subcommittees do a report of about 2 pages or less, and at the end, someone puts it all together, and then that is presented to the Minister of Education. So I won't go through. What I did is I showed the first 5 cohorts and some of the stuff that they did. So the first one of the biggest things that came out of them was that they created this thing called the 9 student voice indicators, and to this day, this report is still, or these 9 indicators of how you know student voice is being recognized are currently used in a lot of the work the ministry does. So that's a big accomplishment for that cohort. The next one, and this is one that I'm just so proud of this cohort for doing. So the second cohort, they're the one that advised the ministry to lower the volunteer requirement from not being able to start it until you start high school in grade 9 to the summer after grade 8 before you have high school. And a big part of the reason why we started Helping Hands is that we found out a lot of students weren't graduating because they hadn't finished their hours. And by extending the amount of time in summers that you can complete this hours, the hope is that more students actually go and volunteer, and that they're not that the reason why they don't graduate isn't because they didn't finish their volunteer hours. So it's a big congrats, I think, to that cohort for doing that. We will be sending this the link to this presentation after, and you can kind of go through and you can see kind of the impact cohort 3, 4, and 5 had. And as mentioned, so there's a lot of reoccurring themes that they've had over the past couple of years. So from academic advocacy to eliminating barriers, to a lot of STEM education, to Indigenous culture and teaching, to French and accessibility. These are some of the biggest recurring themes that I have compiled after talking to several students that have kind of come up in the past 9 cohorts. And I'm going to also include, I'm not going to go and read through these, but these are some great quotes, and I really encourage you guys to read through them because there's a lot of advice that different former members have given, and also kind of gives you an understanding of what you can expect if you were to be on this council. Quick break. Does anyone have any questions? For me, this is about a 15-second delay between when I talk and when you guys get to see it. So I'm just going to wait a couple seconds and see if anyone has any questions in the meantime. All right, so I'm going to take it that right now no one has any questions. But as I said, if anyone has any questions, by all means, please do type it in the chat, and I will try my best to answer. So for MSAC, there is about 5 questions that they ask you. So trying to really understand, who you are. So we're going to kind of go through some of these questions, and I'll give you tips on how to answer each one and how to overall work on your application. So before you start, I heavily recommend making everything in a Google Doc. The form is not editable, so if you were to type it, you can't take a break and come back and finish it. You have to submit it all at one time. What I've actually done for you is, once you get this presentation, if you actually click on the link, I've actually created a sample template, so all you have to do is copy paste it into a new Google Doc, all the questions for you to answer. I also highly recommend, based off experience of I've applied to a lot of things, submitting at least an hour or two before midnight. Right around midnight, everyone's trying to apply, and I've sometimes had it applications crash on me. And even for the Speak Up grant, which was run by the ministry, we also had that problem. So Helping Hands as an organization, we decided about a month ago, for anyone who wanted to apply to Speak Up, which is this $2,500 grant that the ministry does that relates to the student council, that if anyone who wants to do this, that we would help them on their grant. And definitely some people had problems who were trying to submit around midnight, so highly recommend submitting ahead of time. The other thing I will note is on the form, the drop down to choose your school can be tricky. So if your school, for example, is St. Joe's, sometimes some of the schools are like st.joes, or some of them might just be st.joes, so they didn't put the dot. So when you're trying to find your school, it might be a little difficult depending on your spelling. So just try some alternative names, spaces, periods, depending on what your school's name is. And something that's really important to have ahead of time, remembering the deadline for this is January the 10th, and school starts back for high school and elementary school, middle school, starts back the 8th. So make sure you get your principal's name and email address, because you need this for the application. Also make sure you know your parents' phone number, because they need that permission if you're under 18. And if you do not have a cell phone, use the home phone number again, because all the entries on the form are mandatory. So if you don't have a cell phone, it will ask you for one when you go to submit. So for the questions, there's 5 questions. Each of them are worth 3 points, so they score you out of 15. They noted that they asked you to limit your answers to about 150 words, which is around 800 characters for each question. But the character count is actually different from what they recommend. So on the slides that I've submitted, I've actually shown you guys what the actual character count character limit is. So question 1 is, please tell us about yourself and describe a personal experience that has helped shape your unique perspective. What made this experience meaningful to you, and how will it support your participation on MSAC? So for this one, we highly recommend that they're looking for lived experience. So lived experience is a term that you guys will hear a lot, that especially used within politics, and the social sciences, is just saying that you're taking who you are. So if you have have been a mental health issue, like talking about that and knowing that the people that are in the room making a decision on how mental health is handled within the education system shouldn't be people who haven't experienced it. So if you have when you're later on talking about some of the other themes, such as like French education, if you're someone who is Francophone, you want to make sure to talk about that so they understand where you're coming from. And again, when you're talking about your issues, if it's something that other students can relate to, and you can say that this isn't just a problem that just I have, but it relates to other people, by all means, that's a very important part to try to make sure and emphasize for them that this is a problem that the government needs to handle. One thing that we kind of think that would be really important is, and this is a helpful hint and anytime you're applying to anything, is to understand who you're applying to and what their motivations are. So the Ministry of Education itself the government has this thing called the Renewed Vision for Education that they came up with a couple of years ago, called Achievement Excellence. And they have 4 proponents. So achievement excellence, ensuring quality, promoting well-being, and ensuring public confidence. So it means a lot of the stuff the government is trying to do kind of relates to one of these four. So I highly recommend that when you're talking about your different issues, try to get it to fit into one of these four, because that is how the government is trying to do their work. So you make it way easier for them if they're like, oh, I know I need to ensure equity. And if you talk about that, that makes their life easier. So anytime you're applying to anything, I always recommend doing your research into understanding who the people are and trying to tailor your message to fit within the context that they already know. And for Emily's question, yes, I would say, issues can both be negative and positive, but, most of the time when you use the word issue, it is something negative. So yes, you can talk about it. You don't have that much space, but I would if it is something, for example, that your school, when it comes to special ed, that the wait list for it is very long, that is something that you should want to talk about and say that the government needs to do better to have more resources to make that wait list shorter. Does that answer your question, Emily? And also to answer Hannah's question, kind of everything that we're saying throughout this presentation is what would make yours stand out when you're applying. So making sure that you sound like you know what you're saying. So just saying random stuff, but you're actually coming from a perspective of your lived experience, that you understand that the public education system can be better. And that, simple things like making sure you don't have grammatical mistakes is super important. So again, this has, we have some other quotes on what some other ones does. For example, Hannah, who is a current member, her application focused on the lack of support for students with learning disabilities. And she talked about the fact that her sister has a learning disability and their school has a very standardized approach to it, which it should be personalized. Every student has their different way that they learn. So if you guys are trying to make sure that students with learning disabilities have a great environment, you can't make it standardized. It should be personalized. So she kind of talked about that. And she also talked about, because you have 5 questions to kind of talk about different issues, she also talked about how she wants to change the civic education curriculum to integrate more rights-based language. Another student also made sure he highlighted later on his own community involvement in his school. So for question 2, it's a little quicker, but talk about this one's a talk about an experience about either when your voice was heard or not heard. And I think this is a very powerful question that for either way. So if there was, for example, there's the speaker up grants. If you got a speaker up grant, talking about that and talking about how that helped you both improve on yourself, improve your community, improve your school, that's a great question. At the same time, if you've tried to make change, for example, when I was in grade 10, my school decided they didn't want to offer computer science to the students. And I was very vocal about that. It didn't work. The school didn't want to. The school decided no, they weren't just not going to offer this course. But that has fueled a lot of my work to this day as a STEM, as someone who's an advocate for STEM education, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, all because of what happened to me in grade 10. So I would talk about that, say that my voice wasn't heard, something very valid. And I think talking about making it very emotional at the same time when you talk about this is really important for the person who's going to be reading your application. For question 3, this is what have you done or what do you like to do to make sure that all students' voices can be involved and interested in their learning and have their voices heard? For example, if you started a club that helps students talk about art or to talk about a certain issue, that's a great point to put. So just think about, if you've done work, definitely talk about it. And if you haven't had the opportunity yet, talk about both what you would want a club or an initiative in your school to look like, what could be done and what support you need to have this done. And another helpful piece of advice is that, yes, it's a provincial council, but if you have an issue that's maybe very specific to your school or your region, that is fine to talk about. Not everything you have to talk about has to apply to every single school in across the region, because they're trying to get a diversity of students, and both even geographic wise, that the issues in the rural areas of Ontario and Toronto and Mississauga, Brampton is going to be very different from those rural areas. So it's okay to talk about issues that might be only a small part of the population is affected by. For the other one is, so this one is a little bit, is a chance for you to actually kind of tell them what you're interested in, more than just those questions. So this one, I'll show you guys ahead of time. So this is question 4, just asks you basically to have, there's different priorities that the government has focused on, from well-being to students being disengaged in school to global awareness to Indigenous perspectives. So what you're going to do for section 4 is basically choose from your from these drop downs. I'll have 5 of these repeated. Just go from what is your first priority for you specifically to what you relate is like your 5th priority. And then what you're going to do is, for the number 1 priority you chose, you're going to talk about why that's a priority. What I do recommend is that for the other 4 questions you have, whatever you chose for your first priority, it should somehow tie into one of the previous questions, so they understand that you are very serious about this. So if for you, talking about mental health is really important and you chose that as your first priority, I would make sure that somewhere else in those 4 questions that you talked about mental health. For your question about how competitive MSAC and PICO is, I'm not 100% sure about that, but what I can do is with the people that I am connected to, I will do more research about that, and I will try to get back to you. And what we're going to do is when we edit the presentation, we're going to send a Google Doc, so that way I can always edit it. I'll add any questions that you guys ask me that we don't have the answers to right now. We'll answer all those questions in a slide at the end. And then and also I would say the other thing is you do have an option to say other for the drop downs, but I would say before you do that, please try to see if what your idea is does fit within one of those, because it is a wide range of options, and the way that they will be assessing it is trying to fit in within their own categories. So if you do fit within a category, it makes it easier for the person who is evaluating your application than choosing something other. But if you really have something that does not fit with any of them, by all means, choose other, and make sure you explain it very well. And the last one, is talking about an accomplishment or something you participated in that you're really proud to share with. It can be something from talking about, a sports team, whether you won or lost. It could be talking about a club, even a test, that you did. Another, idea is that if you set a goal for yourself earlier in the year and you accomplished it, talk about that. And think about, a big part of this at the end of the day is educators who are reading it. So if it's something that you think, write in the language that you think an educator like your teacher would understand. So if you're talking about a goal, talk about the goal being SMARTs. So the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and like timely, which is something that I know basically almost everyone, all teachers teach people. And for Barney, yes, there's no limit on saying that only one student from a school can be accepted. What I've included is a list of previous students, both from 2017, so the current one, 2017 to 2018, and also found a list from 2015 to 2016. If you want to kind of get a sense of what different students' perspectives were, what their interests were, different, diversity, what parts of the province they were coming from. Take a read through all of those profiles. Another one I would highly recommend to check out. So as I mentioned, we got really lucky that we got to have a nice conversation with a teacher who originally created this council. So after that, she created a podcast where she features people who were on the council talking about student voice. So I highly recommend going through those podcasts. They're really insightful on the council, as well as check out her website because she also has testimonials from previous students. Again, I would recommend if you don't get in this year, don't give up. Hannah applied 3 times before she was accepted onto the council. So if you're in grade 7, you have 5 years you can apply to this. And the other one, yeah, as I mentioned, really important to make sure you do yourself in a Google Doc because the application isn't editable, and I found if you go back and forth a lot, there might be mistakes where all of a sudden, when I was trying to even create this webinar and I was going back and forth in the application, it lost some of my data. So recommend putting everything in Google Doc and then just copying and pasting it at the end. And even if you do that, I also recommend taking screenshots because sometimes you might think that you copy pasted something and it didn't copy paste correctly, and having a screenshot later just verifies the information that you've submitted. Also, like for and the last one is spell check. There also a big recommendation I use is called Grammarly. It's really cool, and I'll add some links to it. It's really cool because it doesn't just do spell check, but also checks your grammar, and it's caught so much stuff that I've stuff wrong that I've written in the past. So I use it on almost anything that I ever write. All right, so I think another question is that, yes, you can talk about the same initiative and question 2 and question 5. There's nothing that stops you from repeating information. And as I mentioned, kind of, especially I think with question 4, repeating, making sure that whatever priority you talk about again somewhere else, I think actually does help your application because it shows how strong you are. And they know that if I invite, Ramisha to the council, if she cares about gender equality, that if she talks about in 2 different sections, for example, that that person when they need the subcommittees, you have somebody for that subcommittee. Any other questions? Because I'm about to move on to the Premier Council section. All right, if anyone has any questions in the meantime, by all means, you can ask. So again, this is a lot of the same stuff. Make sure that you make the Google Docs, submit before midnight. The one thing about this one now is that they do not have actual preset questions. Any board that the government uses, from the Office from Victims of Crime to Metrolink, so the people that do the Go Transit, all use the same centralized system for applying. So the questions are very generic. So you may not fit into all of the categories, but that's fine. Just try your best of answering what information you do have. So yeah, it just starts off with some basic information. If you're not currently located in Ontario, make sure that you just talk about for the duration of when it is, when you are ready to be a part of the council, that you will be in Ontario. The second part, so you have to actually, since it's a centralized system, what you have to do is actually search for the agency that you're looking for. I just suggest looking for the word youth because that's the only one that shows up. And you just have to click on it and add select, and then it will show up below. And you just say you want to be a part-time member. You don't need to worry about the competition number, and you can just go on to the next step. So this is where we're starting to get into the real questions. So there's for part 3, there's 2 questions. So there's your educational background. So for this one, it's just saying the text, all it says is please indicate the institution attended, your degree, your credentials attained, and the year of completion. So whatever, you can talk about the high school you went to. If you went to post-secondary, you can also talk about that. I also recommend not just sticking to the traditional education stuff, but if you've done certificates from something else, talk about that. If you've done MOOCs, which stand for like those massively online courses such as Coursera or Khan Academy, I also recommend talking about that. So anything that you feel it was an educational activity you did that could be seen as this, I would definitely recommend added, especially if you're younger and you haven't gone to post-secondary yet. Whatever you can do to make your application stronger, I recommend adding. There is no actual character limit on these sections, so you might as well take advantage of it. And this was not an educational qualification, but if you're multilingual, that actually helps, especially if you are Francophone. Making sure you mention that is very important. And the other part in section 3 is your community involvement. So they just asked to include the name of the organization you served, your position, and the dates you were involved. I would focus, because this one, I wouldn't say it has to be like a resume where you're going from the most recent to the ones in the past. I'd recommend on the ones you want them to read first, because if they're reading through a lot of applications, people get bored. And as someone who's actually, I've been on the side of HR, looking at people's resumes, it is amazing how fast, when you're reviewing applications, your brain starts to make judgments. So you want to highlight what is your strongest assets first, because that is what someone's going to read. So I would focus on the organizations that you had a leadership in role first. This one they don't say, but what I would think to do is also include a very short sentence on what this organization does if its name isn't recognizable. Like, everyone knows what the Children Aid Society does, but if you were with a community organization that was really small, I would recommend just putting a quick one description name of it if the name isn't obvious of what it does. Like the Jane Initiative, not very clear what that means. On part 4, this has 3 sections. So the first one is your professional and employment background. So this one is kind of more asking basically, what is your resume? You cannot actually attach your resume to this. So what you would have to do is kind of copy paste your resume into the section, but make sure the formatting is correct, because some resumes can have really fancy formatting. So just, you're gonna submit this and just make sure you include the stuff that they asked for like the description, your title, position, the dates you held, and the summary of your responsibilities. For this part, I would definitely recommend thinking about what you did at these, whether for all your previous jobs, what you did that could benefit the council. So if you were writing reports at your previous one, that's really important to be like, I have great writing skills. So really focus on how those previous jobs could help with the council. And if you want advice on this, by all means, you can feel free to ask us questions individually. For part 4, they also asked for memberships in professional organizations, and I think this question was really important for some of the other councils that the Ontario government has. But these are examples would be like the Professional Engineers of Ontario or the Canadian Nurses Association. So a lot of different jobs that are considered professional, such as accountants, have these organizations that kind of speak on their behalf. A lot of them, sometimes by default, you'll become a part of. So my background's engineering, and for us, while we were students, we were all like defaults. We all were by default a part of the Professional Engineers of Ontario Association. Also for this, include secondary or post-secondary clubs if there's a campus chapter of them. So for example, I was also part of the National Society of Black Engineers, and while it was an American association, we had a campus chapter for us, so I would include that on this. What's that? So this is the last part, is additional information. So they kind of left this here to be like, anything else that, didn't fit into their criteria that you want to talk about it here. So for this part, I think it's really important for them to talk about why you want to be on the Premier's Council. Talk about what you could bring to the council if it didn't fit in to the community or an employment situation. So, you know, if you've been doing a lot of youth work or that not as your job, but just on your as your own personal hobby, talk about that. They really want to understand who you are and why, if they choose you to be a part of this council, why you are going to amplify the voice of youth within your community and the province. So some other questions. So this is some advice from some people who are currently on the council. So one of them said, some of the personal interview questions that they ask young people is when you have the interviews, they ask you, what can you bring to the table and how contribute best. So one of the examples he kind of gave is saying, you know, if you were a young person who's in here, the Children's Aid Society, noting that would be really helpful, as that council is actually the Ministry of Children and Youth Services is responsible for the Children's Aid Society. Same thing with Youth Justice. So if you've been a part of the Children's Aid Society, you are Youth in Care, they know that if they put you on the council, that you'll be a strong voice and have a lot of lived experience to help them out when it comes to trying to decide new aspects for that part of their portfolio. And another part, again, if you've worked with past experience working with youth, really effectively explain your specific voice, your perspective, your lived experience, and would be a good contribution to the council. You should also mention any specific policy area or topic of interest, such as the jobs in the economy, health, incarceration, or the justice system. And also include a few sentences as to why, you know, you think it's important to have youth perspective as a part of the policy development and the government decision-making process. The great thing is because this is with the Premier, that means you get to touch all the different departments versus for MSAC, you're really talking to the Ministry of Education. It can affect other ministries, but that isn't its primary focus, where this one is to focus on anything within the Ontario government. The other recommendation I make is, if you do not know what the difference between the provincial and federal levels of policy, definitely do some research and understand when you're talking about a policy area, is this something actually under the purview of the provincial government or is it the federal government? And another piece of advice from someone who's been on the council is that, where possible, note where you want to accomplish or focus on for either youth council. So this person actually was both a part of, they were part of the MSAC, then went on to the Premier's Council, and actually helps make now the Prime Minister's Council. So he kind of recommended making sure that you really focus on what you want to accomplish if you are part of the council. And though it's important to understand the breadth of provincial programs. Members could be asked to work closely for various ministry teams and partnerships based on that knowledge. So having something that's very knowledge in one of the policies, that's also a really big asset. And the other section they have, they're just going to ask you for some references. So just really make sure, I recommend, you don't need to actually include your letters of reference. You're just including their name, their occupation, address, and telephone number. Make sure you tell whoever you applied, whoever you're putting down as your reference, that you're putting them down as your reference and for what. Especially if you ask a professor. Professors get asked so much to do references that it could lose track. The other thing I would also recommend is even giving your references a list of information that, if your reference gets called up or emailed, actually it has to be called up. If your reference gets called, they can speak to what you want them to speak about. So if I were applying to this, I would give my reference to saying, I work on Helping Hands. Please make sure that when you're talking to them, you talk to them about that. So kind of similar to the other ones, I have some quotes from people that you can read through and get some insight. And this also has bios of the current members. Again, read through it and you kind of understand kind of the different aspects people have that got chosen to be a part of the council, and it kind of makes you understand how they're trying to be diverse when it comes to people's lived experience, their professional education, and employment. And again, if you don't get in this year, apply again. This one actually, the other one previously you could not save your responses at the end. This one actually gives you an option to save a PDF before you apply. I highly recommend doing that because it's useful so you can refer to later and get confirmation of what information the council's received. And again, spell checked and Grammarly. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions? I think I see. Thanks so much. Thomas Wolcott is a part of Helping Hands, and he actually stayed home from work today to help with this webinar. So I just want to say a big shout out to Thomas for all his support. So I'm going to talk about some next steps. So for next steps, what we're going to do is we actually want to help you guys edit your application, but this is going to be on a first come first served basis. The priority until January the 10th will be on the ministry, the Ministers' Council, just because it has a first deadline. The Premier's Council is due on January the 19th. So all you're going to do is just make sure you email us. Just put a subject of which one that you guys want help with. So it just makes it easier for us to keep track. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is to include a link to a Google Doc. Make sure that you have either editing or commenting permissions. Put that link in the body of the email that you send us. Make sure to also tell us your name, the school you go to, and what city you live in. It just will help us kind of keep track of everybody. If there's any questions that you guys have, also feel free to message us. Just make sure that, again, you put it the heading as either MSC's help or PICO help. If you want to ask a question about both, and I guess put both in the subject heading, just make sure the heading is definitely one of has the name of the council that you want and the word help in it, because that way I know how to filter through emails. The last part I'm going to ask about is valuation. So are right now funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation to do our work. This webinar, something that new that we wanted to try on, in addition to the workshops that we do in person. So we are going to definitely ask you guys, it's so crucial for you guys to fill out the evaluation form. So we're going to send it to everyone that attended later. It's like, I cannot just say how important this is for us to continue the work that we are doing. For next steps, I'm gonna say stay tuned. Also, we're gonna be launching a new beta of our app soon, and would definitely love for you guys to try it out, to give us your feedback. We're all youth that run Helping Hands. So getting feedback and from other people is really important for to us. We'll also be recruiting for our own youth council right now, so it's really funny that just a balance of, as soon as this one's done, we'll start recruiting. So if you guys are interested in joining our team, by all means, we would love to have you guys on here. And the last part is, as mentioned earlier, Helping Hands, we host these workshops that talk about the importance of volunteering, the importance of civic engagement. So we kind of go through from how to vote, talking about, it's important to vote, you should join youth councils, you should message your MP or MPP or city councilor if you have an issue. So we kind of go through all of that. As well as a heavy focus on communication, because we kind of realize one of the biggest barriers to sometimes getting involved is communication skills. So schools, unfortunately, still do not teach how to write a proper email. They teach how to write a letter. But most people do not know, most of the times this day, you're not writing a letter and sending it in the mail to somebody, you're writing an email. So understanding how to correctly do that. So if you belong to a youth group, or of another youth group that would appreciate having our workshop, please get us in touch. It's free to them. We will come and do the workshop. So just make sure to email us the name of the youth group with whoever the person who's in charge is, and where your location is, and we'll get right in touch with you on trying to see arranging us doing workshops. Our goal right now is to do 14 workshops by the end of April, and we only have 4 or 5 booked. So I'm looking to book about another 10 workshops. So please, please message us if you think you belong to a youth group or know of a youth group that would enjoy this. Or even if a group in general, as long as our primary focus is on obviously young people. Again, so any questions? And I also apologize if I spoke a little fast. It is a very bad habit of mine. Right? And then if there are no questions, I'm just gonna say thank you guys so much for attending this. Again, out. So if you guys have more questions that you guys want to ask afterwards, you can feel free to email us at info@helpinhandsapp.com. Or you can also check out, if you haven't seen what we're doing, check out our website. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We have the same handle across all 3. It's Help Hands App, because unfortunately Helping Hands was taking. But yeah, feel free, please message us, stay in touch. We hope to do stuff like this in the future. So if there's other, for example, in the Prime Minister's Council, that's something that we want to see if we can help out with. Or if there's other ideas you think that, you know, fits in the purview of helping youth get engaged in the communities, whether it's through volunteering or youth councils, message us. Like, we'd love to help out, and we'd also love to work with other organizations. So if you have recommendations, please, please help us out. We're a small team that just got started last year, so we're really looking to see how we can grow. And yeah, so I'll be sending out in a little bit. I just want to get a little, because I have some other messages from people who have emailed, not just responded to in the YouTube. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all those questions. I will edit this presentation to include some of the questions that people have been asking. And I will send you guys out all a link. If you guys have not signed up on the Google form, and you guys are just listening to this presentation, please sign up, because that's how anyone who signed up on that form will be getting the email with the tips for the application and the webinar itself. Right? Again, I hope you guys have a great Tuesday and enjoy the rest of your holiday break. And actually, I'll just stay online for another 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. But other than that, have a great day.